Now, with all the day's stories making the headlines, it's the very latest ITV News at 10.
Self-isolation and school bubbles are set to be scrapped as lockdown rules continue to be ditched. It means children can still go to class and workers head to work. But amidst the euphoria, what are the risks politically for the government and medically for us?
It's too much too soon for the general population, and for those of us that feel vulnerable, it's just going to push us back into our own homes.
I'll be exploring the vital questions with our political and science editors. Also in News at 10 tonight, a mother's heartfelt tribute to her 2 daughters murdered by a Satanist. The night before the game of their lives, Steve is at Wembley ahead of England's Euros semi-final. Whilst Geraint reports from Denmark on the underdog nation standing in Gareth Southgate's way. Another summer sensation, Emma Raducanu, shows her support for England as she reveals what caused her heartbreaking withdrawal from Wimbledon.
It was a combination of, everything that has gone on behind the scenes in the last week.
And normally the preserve of wealthy Westerners, how COVID has opened Kenya's fabled safaris to Kenyans.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. Whether they are workers or school children, thousands are being pinged every day by the NHS coronavirus app, forced to languish at home with all the frustration that brings. Well, today there were announcements from both the Health and Education Secretaries about ending self-isolation in England. Health First, Sajid Javid, who now believes there could soon be 100,000 cases a day, told MPs that people who've been double vaccinated can take COVID tests instead. The change won't come in, though, for another 6 weeks, angering the businesses that are pressing for it. For schools, it will come sooner. Gavin Williamson is scrapping the bubble system from July the 19th. Again, tests will replace isolating at home. Last week, more than 600,000 pupils were doing just that.
One staff member from this Henley-on-Thames pub tested positive at the weekend, but as a consequence, 5 more at the Angel on the Bridge had to self-isolate, leaving the landlord with a problem.
I had to make a decision to close the upstairs and internal parts of the pub and bring all the staff downstairs.
How many bookings did you have to cancel?
It was 88 on Saturday and 99 on Sunday.
Businesses up and down the country have struggled with healthy staff having to take time off. But today, the Health Secretary said that would largely end.
From the 16th of August, when even more people will have the protection of both doses and when modelling suggests the risks from the virus will be even lower, anyone who's a close contact of a positive case will no longer have to self-isolate if they have been fully vaccinated.
So, from the 16th of August, for the fully vaccinated, no self-isolation is needed if they've been in close contact with a positive case. A PCR test will be advised for those contacts, but will not be compulsory. Anyone under 18 will also not have to self-isolate. And that's not the only restriction on children, which we now know will be lifted. The Education Secretary told the Commons that the system of bubbles in English schools will be scrapped from the 19th of July, as will staggered starts, face masks and social distancing. The reaction from teaching unions has been mixed, but with 640,000 pupils in England currently off school for COVID-related reasons, there's no doubt the bubble system has been disruptive.
This list indicates those students who are currently self-isolating as a result of a positive test in the school.
And heads are glad to be getting back to normal.
We can be free again. We can be free again to teach and be creative. Students can access practical subjects. They can access fully the PE. We won't have to worry too much more about the social distancing. Our staff will feel a bit more free in terms of teaching.
But for the clinically vulnerable, like Jane Leahy, school was already a concern.
Immunocompromised, so having children going to school has been quite worrying. And it was okay at first when the schools closed and they were both at home, but going back to school was quite stressful.
And the combination of relaxations announced this week is quite frightening.
It's too much too soon for the general population, and for those of us that feel vulnerable, it's just going to push us back into our own homes.
The easing of restrictions at a time when the virus poses less of a threat but is spreading rapidly is an experiment for everyone. But not everyone faces the same level of risk. Carl Dinin, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, to discuss the scientific and political implications of all this, I'm joined by our science and political editors. And to Tom, our science editor first. Tom, what's the science, the data that the politicians are relying on, or the government's relying on so emphatically to, have this cascade of ending lockdown?
I mean, you have to look at the numbers and you wonder, how confident they can be. Cases are rising exponentially. The Health Secretary today is saying we could see 100,000 cases a day within weeks if things continue as they are. Remember the peak back in January when you saw 60,000 cases a day. So that's a significant number. The reason they can, of course, is because that link between hospitalisation, between cases and hospitalisation and deaths is it's weakened and it's holding. If we had 100,000 cases back in January, we'd be looking at 2,000 or more deaths a day, an astonishing number, way more than the 1,300 we peaked at back then. Right now, by sort of compared with today's figures, maybe 100 or 200. Still a very high death toll, but nothing close to overwhelming the NHS. The timing is also good. The science advisors are pretty united in thinking open up now, avoid that serious winter wave. Where they, I think, differ from the government is the risk involved here. With numbers that high, you risk things going wrong. And the COVID has thrown us curveballs before. One of the obvious things that could happen with infection rates very high, even if people aren't going into hospital or dying from COVID in large numbers, you could have so many people off sick. Things like hospitals are quite hard to run. In fact, even today, Rageh Hospital up in Inverness apparently has had to cancel some measures because of staff being off sick with COVID.
Robert, that's quite a sobering assessment by sort of Tom, but yet there'll be many people who'll be, enthusiastic for the ending of the lockdown, but it's a big political risk for the government, isn't it?
Well, there's two ways of looking at this. Boris Johnson is doing what his own MPs want. I've spoken to lots of them today, and they buy his argument, if not now, when they say, we spent a fortune on vaccinating people. They point to what Tom has just said, that the link between infection, hospitalisations and deaths is not as strong as it was, and they think he's doing the right thing. But wider than that, not just the opposition, but in the country as a whole, you can look at opinion polls and people are very nervous about what the Prime Minister has announced. And there's one group in particular, actually we just heard a bit about that in Carl's little film, who are more than nervous. They feel they're second-class citizens. And, those are those whose immune systems are compromised, and they have tremendous difficulty seeing off any kind of infection. Vaccines don't work as well on them. And then just those who are very frail. There are millions of people who, if they get COVID, it is very serious. And they feel that they are being told to stay indoors and continue to isolate. They feel like second-class citizens, and they think it is mad, absolutely mad, that all social distancing is ending and that wearing masks is no longer compulsory in indoor settings.
OK, thank you both for telling us about the scientific and political risks in the days and weeks and months ahead. To other news now, and more of the background of the Satanist who stabbed to death two sisters while they were having a birthday picnic has been revealed. Daniel Hussein, 18 at the time, was convicted of their murder today. His school had referred him to the government's de-radicalisation programme for potential terrorists when he was 15 because they judged him vulnerable to grooming, but was discharged months later as no risk.
For sisters Bieber Henry and Nicol Smallman, the 5th of June 2020 had been a night for celebration. To mark Bieber's 46th birthday, a picnic in the park with friends. Just hours later, they were dead. Murdered by Daniel Hussein. This the moment he was arrested at his family home.
That's it. That's it.
Take your hand for it.
You're under arrest.
by police armed with tasers, an 18-year-old planning a night of sacrifice and violence, who'd made a demonic pact to win the lottery by killing women. Bieber and Nicol's mother, Mina, had come to court every day for almost a month and listened as the guilty verdicts were read out.
Today we remember our girls as the wonderful, strong women they were. And we hope that some good will come out of this horrible story.
That evening, Bieber and Nicol were preparing for their picnic. Nicol seen here dancing and chatting to a supermarket cashier before heading to the park. The next morning, friends and family were so concerned about Bieber and Nicol, some of them came here to the park to search for them. The sisters' glasses and a kitchen knife led them to the bodies. They were found together, hidden in undergrowth. Hussein had stabbed them multiple times and cut his hand during the attack, leaving a trail of blood and DNA all across the picnic site. Which led police to Hussein. In custody, he was asked about the cuts to his hands.
The injuries on your fingers. What happened there?
But after a long pause, Hussein eventually replied. In his bedroom, though, detectives discovered this disturbing note he'd written. Bizarrely, a pact he'd made with a demon to kill women in order to win the lottery. It was signed in his blood. Hussein had had a long-standing interest in Satanism and the occult, and he'd expressed far-right views. His school so concerned, it had previously referred him to the government's anti-terror prevent programme.
I believe if he hadn't caused such significant injuries to his hands, that he would have gone on to kill more women.
We'll never know why Hussein chose Bieber and Nicol to kill that night. Sisters who were so happy and so full of life. Sejal Karia, News at 10, Wembley.
If you were shocked by our investigation 2 weeks ago into Amazon sending unsold items to landfill sites, you were not alone. Our report was watched by the Environment Secretary George Eustice, who told a parliamentary committee today that he'd asked his department to investigate and look into whether a change in the law was necessary.
I mean, it does sound an extraordinary, approach just to be disposing of goods that are perfectly good, but they just don't have a home and they can't be bothered to store them. Obviously, that is a chronic waste.
George Eustice. Well, now, England expects, especially when it's the Euros semi-final, in front of a Wembley crowd after the most challenging and grim year that this country has been through in decades. Well, that's the weight on the shoulders of the England squad, managed by a man who knows more than most England players about the long years of hurt that can follow when a team full of promise and talent falls short. We've all been there, and it is the hope that is the hardest thing to cope with. Yet, hope many of us will. This time tomorrow, we'll know, unless the dreaded penalties loom.
It's been a very quick turnaround for England since Saturday night's heroics in Rome. The squad is now in London ahead of the game of their lives and a chance to do something no other England team has ever done. Given that, how are they dealing with the ever-increasing pressure of expectation?
The pressure is what you choose it to be, really. I think it's a motivating thing. It's a challenge for us. If we were a country that had won 5 titles and we had to match what had gone before, it might feel differently, but we're not. Denmark have won it, so maybe there's more pressure on Denmark to replicate that.
The muted celebrations after their Ukraine demolition job evidence this team will not be satisfied with anything other than the big prize. Many of them, of course, tasted defeat at the same stage at the Russia World Cup 3 years ago.
A lot of them were obviously involved in the semi-final against Croatia, and obviously that hurt a lot, and I think they learned a lot from that game. I think that's shown in this tournament, the way we've adapted and grown as a team.
Denmark are no strangers to this stage, making tomorrow's game even more unpredictable.
The last time England played Denmark in a competitive match was here at Wembley last October. Harry Maguire was sent off and England lost 1-0.
England's tournament so far has progressed near perfectly, but that counts for nothing if it ends tomorrow night.
We can obviously talk as much as we want, but the bottom line is we've got to go out there and perform, and we've got to go and be free tomorrow night and enjoy it, but of course have a real focus on trying to get through to the final.
In 24 hours, this young squad could be celebrating a life-changing result, or alternatively reflecting on a giant missed opportunity. That great unknown guarantees a nerve-jangling couple of hours for tens of millions up and down the country. Steve Scott, News at 10, Wembley.
Well, that's the England camp, but England's opponents, Denmark, have arrived in Britain ready for tomorrow's night's match. They have done well so far after a very difficult start. Some pundits say it was the cardiac arrest and collapse of their star striker, Christian Eriksen, that has galvanised their performances. But don't forget, Denmark won the tournament in 1992, as Gareth Southgate was just saying, after only qualifying by default.
COVID rules mean Denmark's fans can't travel to Wembley, so they made sure their team got a good send-off as they headed to the airport today. They've played some terrific football to make it to the semi-finals, but for the Danes, this tournament has become so much more than a sporting competition. The most significant player in this squad wasn't on the bus. Indeed, he hasn't featured since he was carried off the pitch in the opening game. The cardiac arrest that Christian Eriksen suffered and survived was a collective trauma and then a national inspiration.
It was pretty hard to see my friend lying on the field like that.
Katrina Veja is now a Danish international footballer herself, but as a schoolgirl, she and Christian played in the same team.
It feels like Denmark just got together, and it means a lot to everyone that he's safe and good now.
Danish footballing philosophy has a name, Die Rote Tred, the red thread, which runs from the national team all the way down to the grassroots, and it demands that the game be played in an exciting and ambitious way.
A quite astonishing achievement.
It's an approach which has yielded results, most spectacularly in the European Championships of 1992. Denmark got a side together at 1 week's notice after another team was disqualified. They went on to beat Germany in the final. The scorer of Denmark's first goal that day sees some similarities this time round.
John Jensen has finally got one right.
No one would have believed that we could go to the semi-final, and without Christian Eriksen, who is probably the best player we got in the team. We were playing without him. It was the same in 92. We played with our best player, Michael Laudrup, and we won it. So the whole nation is having a big party every time Denmark is playing, and hopefully we can have that party all the way till Sunday night.
It'll be an especially big party if Denmark get to another final. This tournament has reminded their fans how precarious life can be and how precious its joyful moments are. Geraint Vincent, News at 10, Copenhagen.
Well, neither Denmark nor England can be sure just yet who the winner of their game will play in the final. Italy and Spain have been fighting it out this evening. With 10 minutes left of the 90, Italy were 1-0 ahead and seemed to have the upper hand. But Spain got the equaliser to take the match to extra time.
For the final 3 matches of the Euros, all roads lead to Wembley. Tonight's crowd the biggest in the UK since the pandemic began. Bittersweet for fans not allowed to travel from Italy or Spain. Instead, 2 expat armies bringing the party to Wembley.
We're going to make the noise equivalent of all Spain. Exactly. All the people that couldn't come, we're going to make that noise.
We are confident, but it's a semi-final. Anything can happen.
It almost did for Italy, who came close first.
And it hits the post. Barella was offside anyway.
Seconds before the break, Emerson rattling the bar with the last chance of the first half. And in a game not short of opportunities, it was Italy who found the net first, with a fantastic strike from Federico Chiesa.
Chiesa, yes!
To the relief and delight of the Italian fans. Spain might have drawn level a few minutes later.
Missed it!
But Alvaro Morata didn't. Spain's second half substitute, making it 1-1. Wembley erupting in a sea of red and yellow. Extra time then, and with Spain unbeaten in 13 games, Italy a record-breaking 32, maybe it's no surprise that 90 minutes wasn't enough to separate them. Whether it's England or Denmark, they'll have to stay up a little longer to find out who awaits them in the final. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
Well, let's talk to Steve now at Wembley. Steve, a tense game ongoing behind you. And I guess we're in for a tense affair tomorrow night too, aren't we?
Rageh, I think we are. I think we can guarantee it's going to be a great occasion. And of course, it is a great opportunity too. I mean, everything should favour England. They're playing at home. They're playing in front of 65,000 fans. And of course, the majority of those will be English. But England's journey through this tournament has been pretty faultless so far. They haven't faced adversity. They haven't even conceded a goal. And I think what's going to be really interesting, if that happens tonight, how they cope with it. Now, many England fans throughout this tournament have said all England need to do is beat Germany and they'd guarantee a place in the final. Well, I don't think it's quite as simple as that. You have to remember that Denmark are ranked higher than Germany in the world rankings. Their recent record against England is very, very good. 1 win and 1 draw. And of course, as we've been reflecting this evening, they're being carried along on this powerful wave of Christian Eriksen emotion. So I think there's not much you can guarantee about tomorrow night. But however it plays out, I think you can guarantee it will be very, very tense.
OK, Steve, exciting night to put it mildly tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed. Highlights of the Italy-Spain game are coming up later on ITV when we'll know who has won that match to face England. And tomorrow, England's game against Denmark will be live on ITV with the build-up starting at 6:30, so tune in right then. Throughout the Brexit process and with Vauxhall switching production of its next Astra model away from Ellesmere Port, there's been real anxiety on Merseyside that the factory may be on the way out. Turns out, though, nothing of the sort. It seems the government has come through with the required funding to persuade Vauxhall's owners to build the company's first all-electric cars and vans there. Hundreds of jobs will be saved by Vauxhall's £100 million investment.
Out with the old and in with the new. These fast-charging electric vans and cars will have a range of up to 174 miles. But more crucially, they will save all 1,000 jobs here and a plant that otherwise would have closed.
A lot of uncertainty in the last 5 or 6 months, but now we have clarity of the future. But that clarity of the future is much brighter because of the electrification. It'll be the only plant that's fully electric within the UK.
This is great. I mean, we've been working on this for months.
And the government had to, given the parent group Stellantis had called their ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 as brutal.
If you look at the 100 million that Stellantis have put in, it dwarfs the amount that we've supported the government.
Why can't you tell us how? Why can't you tell us how much?
Because you will understand that I'm having conversations with lots of companies, and that this is commercially sensitive information.
With other companies about electrification for their vehicles.
With about electrification.
The investment at Ellesmere Port follows an even bigger taxpayer subsidy to Nissan last week that created 1,650 jobs in Sunderland. State aid easing automotive uncertainty around Brexit for now.
The last of the internal combustion engine vehicles will run off the production line here at the start of next year. After that, it's all electric, smaller versions of vans like these. But not everything will be made in the UK, and longer term, that could be a problem.
The batteries will be brought in from Europe, adding to costs.
How much of a disadvantage is it?
Whilst this makes sense for the company at the moment, giving increased demand for vans, given all the home deliveries taking place, unless we see, I think, battery production in the UK, there's going to be a question mark about the long-term sustainability of this.
The UK car sector remains far from secure, but tonight it does look a fair bit brighter. Richard Pallow, News at 10, Ellesmere Port, Cheshire.
The new star of Wimbledon, Emma Raducanu, looked more like her old, or should I say, young self today. The smile was back even as she talked about having to retire during last night's game. She said she had trouble regulating her breathing after a hard-fought end to the first set, and the excitement and the buzz were factors too, but not having to wait almost all day to get on court.
It was a dramatic end to teenager Emma Raducanu's fairy tale Wimbledon debut. Retiring from her fourth-round match against Ayla Tomljanovic with breathing difficulties and dizziness. She admits it feels like the hardest thing in the world not to be able to finish her Wimbledon on court.
It was a combination of, everything that has gone on behind the scenes in the last week and accumulation of the excitement, the buzz and You know, I think it's a great learning experience for me going forwards.
Among the many messages of support for Emma, one from another young sports star, England footballer Marcus Rashford, writing, "It happened to me playing for the national team in under-16s against Wales. I remember it to this day. No explanation for it, and it never happened again. You should be very proud of yourself. The country is proud of you." It was almost 8 o'clock at night when Rageh, ranked 338th in the world, walked on to court number 1 to start her match. And there have been questions about whether the delay added to the pressure on Britain's newest tennis star.
The scheduling was not great for her, but when we have Manic Monday, that's what happens. Also, I'm sure they wanted her on late in the day for the public. Everybody would be home watching the telly and other devices, made it easier.
Wimbledon's organisers say they take great care when scheduling matches. In a statement, the All England club said all decisions are made with fairness and with the best interests of the tournament, players, spectators and our worldwide broadcast audience at heart. Emma Raducanu says this has been a learning experience, but she's determined to come back stronger. Martha Fairley, News at 10, Wimbledon.
Finally, the wonders of Kenya's wildlife in its great national parks are, in normal times, out of the reach of most of the country's own population. Game reserves are the preserve of wealthy, safari-loving tourists from overseas. But there haven't been any of them around recently because of travel restrictions. So those prices have fallen, making safaris affordable for more Kenyans to enjoy what is on their doorstep.
This is probably the most dangerous river crossing in the animal kingdom. The lead zebra chose the point wisely, and they all got across safely. An earlier herd wasn't so lucky, as one of their number was snatched by crocodiles. The treacherous Masai Mara migration is the reason American and European tourists have traditionally paid big money to go on safari here. The Masai Mara must always be a sight to behold, but this year, in the time of COVID, there is a difference. It's not the spectacle, it's who's coming here to take it all in. For the first time ever, ordinary Kenyans are going on safari in large numbers because COVID has prevented well-heeled foreigners from doing so. Prices have dropped, so more and more local people, like the Theory family from Nairobi, are getting to appreciate the splendour of this storied corner of their own country.
From our first drive-in, we saw leopards, we saw elephants, we've seen pretty much almost everything. And this is our first night here, so it's beautiful.
Beside a pool that's home to a pod of squabbling hippos, we found the Josiah family, again from Nairobi, enjoying a champagne breakfast.
The prices have amazingly come down. In the past, 5-star facilities would accommodate the very few at the top tier. Now you have just the ordinary Kenyan coming to such facilities to visit, which is amazing.
As much as we need foreign exchange coming in, the tourism way, but we equally need our own selves keeping the industry and all these industries running.
And appreciating Kenya.
True. Absolutely. I mean, we're opening up our hearts to what we actually have.
Last year, most hotels in the Masai Mara had to close because there were no tourists. Safari guides and many others dependent on visitors were laid off. Now they have their fellow Kenyans to thank for getting their jobs back.
We have 7 properties. They're all open, you know. Just that. We can only say thanks to the local markets. They have honestly done us proud.
Coronavirus has had many unimagined consequences, but few unimagined dividends. Enabling this country's citizens to come here is one. Fresh pairs of eyes to marvel at the majestic drama of somewhere most couldn't previously afford to venture. John Irvine, News at 10, the Masai Mara in Kenya.
Lovely story, great country. And that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow after, of course, the big game at Wembley, when we'll know whether or not England have reached the final of the Euros. But until then, from all of us, good night